steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. If you're new, please consider subscribing. What I'd like to do is jump right in. You're consuming this obviously on YouTube, so thank you very much. You've seen the thumbnail, so you'll have an idea, of course, what I'll be talking about. Now, I want to thank Chris Dunn from Lincoln Land for sending this one to me. I typically will review all of these cars for sale way in advance as they start to hit these websites like the Barrett Jacksons of the world. Of course, this one is Mecum Auctions, but lately just trying to balance everything, as I said on a recent podcast episode. So with that being said, let's jump into the 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible. Now on the thumbnail, probably put, why did it only sell for what it sold for? And here's the crazy thing. If you look at the upper right, you're going to see it sold for $55,000. So I want to talk about why, and I want to talk about briefly, how you can end up getting one of these cars, because they are out there. All right. If you've been following the channel for any length of time, you know that these car prices have continued to increase. Now, someone casually might see this and go, wow, the market is softening. And certainly, as I said recently in the podcast, you can check out those episodes here, the video episodes from 2024 on. I think I've been doing video episodes of the podcast, audio episodes prior to that. But what I've continued to reinforce is there are going to be some anomalies. There's going to be some certain cars that maybe is or an example of a rusty car, or an example of, a basket case of a car, some of those anomalies that we've seen, but certainly that has not been the trend. So let's look and see, is this an anomaly or is this the trend? Now, this car just sold at the time of this recording 2 days ago, and this was part of the Larry Claremont Museum collection. And Larry's legacy, what these auction houses love to do is kind of put together, whether they're liquidating a collection if somebody passes away or somebody's ready to move on to a new hobby. These are big, prestigious type things, because these eclectic collectors, if you will tend to have a lot of cool stuff, right? If we look at the high level overview of this car, is we know it's a light blue 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible, and it's the 430, right? I mean, all of that is like the RST LNE in Wheel of Fortune. It's a given. Well, the color's not, but automatic transmission, so on and so forth, all of that stuff, MEL 430, of course, until 65. The highlights, you pretty much have the bullet pointed stuff here. What we can see is it does have the Ultronic Eye, which is the automatic headlight dimmer. That was a feature. And it kind of goes on to say the big thing that you need to know is all vehicles being offered from the Larry Claremont Museum collection, what they're referring to as Larry's Legacy auction, have been set up for long-term museum display. Any vehicle purchased from the collection will likely need the essentials, right? The kind of brakes, fuel system, carburetor, battery, things like that. So the big thing on this car was the engine, and they were specific. They said the engine didn't turn over. Well, let's take a look and see, is that of concern? We can see here the front 3/4 shot. We see the distinctive 64 kind of front forward-leaning grille, which is very, very iconic. All of the bright work looks really nice. We can look down the side. We know in 64, we've got the trim pieces on the front fender, the rear quarter panel, as well as down the side. All of that is there. We can see a little discoloration on that white wall. Of course, if it's set up for long-term storage, you'd imagine, this car has been sitting for some length of time. A lot of times those white walls, they will clean up very nicely. I'll probably do a future episode or short video rather on that subject. We know in 64, in 63, but as well as 64, the antenna is on the front there. So everything that we're seeing here from this front 3/4 shot looks good. Now, what I have seen a lot of times in these long-term storage, there used to be a guy in South Florida. I never saw his facility face to face, but he had this beautiful facility, much like what you're seeing here. And I've seen it on TV and on videos. Convertibles, they're going to keep them inside with the top down. So the only concern there, and this isn't really a deal breaker whatsoever, is Blair, John Cashman, Chris Dunn, these Lincoln gurus that have been around 40 plus years in terms of tied to this hobby and these cars that we all love. They will tell you, hey, you want to cycle the top, right? That's a tip for anybody out there. I typically will store my cars with the top down, and I will pull them out every so often and cycle the top, or of course if we're going somewhere, might put the top up and then put it down. But you can imagine potentially a little bit of kind of service work that would need to be factored into buying a car that has been sitting for some length of time. There are still the experts, John Cashman on the West Coast, my friend Tony Bolin, who is still continuing to be an up and comer, really doing great things, fixing convertibles, fixing brakes, great mechanic, unbelievable. There's Blair Farmer. There are a few people, and really a good old school mechanic could probably get a lot of the cobwebs, if you will, worked on this car. We see the rear 3/4 shot here. Again, the main consensus is everything is there, right? We see all the trim, no dents and dings and things like that we can see, especially with the bumper ends and whatnot. We've got that iconic 64 and up scripting for the Continental. And a big thing here too is also the blue color. If you're not a powder blue type fan, I can understand this may not be the car for you. I would assume that there's probably going to be potential buyers out there that were looking to buy this that were like, hey, I'm going to paint it black and I'm going to bag it and I'm going to do all those things. And certainly they can do that if they so choose. We can see the exhaust tips kind of tapered down, as you would imagine. If I remember correctly, the stock appearance, you typically won't see those where they're kind of cut. I mean, unless you're kind of far behind the car trailing it, you typically won't see those. But again, that's very, very minor. We can see the grid patterns on the deck lid, as well as the 2 bumper inserts left and right. Those all look good. What we can also see here is Tony Boss Bolin's calling in, so we're going to chuck him to voicemail. But from what we can see from the deck lid, I mean, this looks really good from what we can tell. The key thing here is, as I've always stated, there are some known challenges with these potentially underneath the hood in the deck lid, and that's something that's, again, not a deal breaker whatsoever. I'm a big fan of the blue Lincolns. Of course, my 64 has the same interior. It's got the black that helps kind of knock down some of the sunlight on top. And then you've got the blue interior. And then it does look like factory carpet, possibly changed at some point. It's kind of hard to tell from here. I briefly went through these. The carpet may not be factory, but again, that's not a deal breaker either. I can see that the seats look original, which is fantastic. I love that original look. I would by all means keep this interior, take it to someone if you don't want to do it, that can kind of steam clean the interior and get a lot of that kind of grime and things like that, or just leave it as is, which I certainly really, really dig. We've got one of the 60, I think that was a 65 advertisement in it, just kind of sitting there, probably something someone gave him or he acquired at some point. We can see that it has, I believe, the AM FM radio, which was a feature, and we have the electronic eye, which we can see up here as well. Again, kind of hard to tell if the carpet is factory. It looks like it is, but it does look a little bit dark, so you guys can kind of chime in there what you think. Of course, we got the MEL 430, the Mercury Edsel Lincoln 430, very strong engine. Now, some folks, I believe, would have a concern with, wow, the engine doesn't, quote, turn over. And, well, one of the reasons why I can tell you it doesn't turn over is there's no battery in it. I would almost guarantee that if there was a battery put on this car and someone turned, a good battery, and someone turned the ignition, you're going to hear some sort of cranking. It's going to want to turn over. Now, certainly you're going to want to check the oil first and do those type of things. But, somebody of this prestige is going to take a car like this and, typically not drain the oils and things like that. But I would almost certainly believe that this MEL 430 is easily up and running with just a little bit of basic mechanical attention, if you will. We can see that it has a dual master, which is key. They don't go to that from a Lincoln perspective until 67. And I always talk about the importance of having a dual versus the single pot, if you will. I know some people have chimed in. Typically, if you have cruise control, you can't do that. Cruise control is not present here, and it's very rare in the grand scheme of things. So nothing to really kind of go down a bunny trail there. We could also see that it is an air-conditioned car. So if we looked at the Haggerty pricing, which I did not do prior to this video, we would know you'd add about 10% for the air-conditioned car. We can also see from here that it is a 2-port, not a 3-port fuel pump, right? We always talk about, and something I've always reiterated because it was reiterated from some of those OGs that I mentioned a little while ago, those original kind of folks that have been around these cars many, many years. You really want to have a 3-port. You could argue there are some folks that live in places where it doesn't get as hot. Hey, I've never had a problem. Certainly, if that's the case, the old adage, I believe, is if it's not broke, don't fix it. But certainly, these car engine bays build a ton of heat. What we can see, of course, it does have the fan shroud. It's a metal fan shroud in 64, and that's a key thing. We can also see up in this region, in just in front of the fan shroud, we've got this area here where there's this little forget what the official term of it is, but you see these. There's five bolts that hold this piece in, and it kind of attaches to the top of the radiator, and it goes up to the front nose of the car. It just helps things, it helps keep everything sturdy in there, right, and attached. But we can see it is painted blue. What's the significance of that? Factory, it is black. That's just kind of telling us at some point we know this car was resprayed, not the end of the world, and someone, whoever was painting it, they probably painted underneath the hood, and they just kind of the way they taped it off, they blew all of this in, so to speak, with paint. Not the end of the world. But those are the little things I try to kind of look at to give you that insight. Someone might go look at this car and go, wow, I'm getting an all original car that's never been repainted. I mean, these cars are 60 plus years old at this point. Certainly, a respray would not be out of the question at some point. We can also see the engine bay was painted. So my recollection is that the engine bays are always black aprons. I don't know why that's sticking in my head. But if someone did respray this car and they painted the engine bay, that's not a bad thing. I mean, I like when it, all looks nice and clean. And certainly this one looks pretty clean overall. We can see, again, the battery is missing. It does have a disconnect for the battery here, which is key. I always talk about you want to do that on any car, kind of older car, if you will. The air cleaner, the valve covers, I mean, everything looks very nice in here. Everything is that black color, which is factory. So I'd say in the grand scheme of things, this engine bay is very nice compared to your normal car that you're going to run across on a bring a trailer. You can also see here, this is where the hood latches in this section. That is also kind of blown in, if you will, with that blue powder paint. Those are the type of things, again, not the end of the world, but whoever was painting this car, based upon how they taped it off, they kind of just sprayed all that. Again, just, little things I like to kind of call out there. More than likely, the air conditioning's not going to work on a car like this. There is going to need to be some maintenance, whether it needs a new clutch or, things like that. And again, any competent air conditioned old school mechanic will be able to get that stuff going. Engine bay, again, overall to me looks fairly nice. It does have the battery box. This is kind of a unicorn item. I've talked about, Tony and I kind of call some of the things on these cars unicorns, and this is one of them. Typically someone will remove this battery box. It's not the end of the world. Those batteries typically aren't moving around even without it. But at some point, someone put it back in there, which is fantastic. I'm assuming it was removed when the painting was done, and that's a great thing because, again, it's there, and again, it's kind of a unicorn part. But in the grand scheme of things, I want to go ahead and wrap this up with this. Someone got a very solid car at $55,000. There are some of you that are going to go, wow, that was a steal. Absolutely. I truly think it was, because if somebody had the funds to be able to pull and grab the car and bring it home and get it to their mechanic, or, pull it in their garage and go, okay, let's rebuild the carb. Let's do a few of these things. Let's get it running and driving. The exhaust looked new, which is good. I mean, we did not see any photos underneath it. That's a key thing. Obviously, you got to see that stuff. That's probably another reason why maybe the price didn't go a little bit higher. Like, wow, this car's up in, I think, the Midwest, it was Indiana. You have those potential items, right? Those unknowns. But let's say my assumption is correct that underneath that car is solid. It looks clean. There's not any leaks and things like that. If it has oil in it and, it hasn't been sitting for 30 years or something like that, certainly you could probably throw a battery in it, put some fresh fuel. On these cars, I don't often talk about this, but where those soft fuel lines come up from that left apron on the driver's side, you basically have from that 2 or 3 port fuel pump, you have your soft lines that go over to that front far left driver's side corner. And where those fuel lines go through, they go to the hard lines. Like, let's say somebody was looking to get a car started. Seen this many, many, many times. We've done this as well here at my place, as well as Tony's. I'm sure all the other places out there, but you could pull those fuel lines, soft lines. You can loosen those clamps. You could pop those 2 lines. One's the return, one's the feed, of course, to the fuel pump. And if that fuel pump is working and it's pumping, you could basically put, use cautionary, right? I always talk about disclaimer. This is all for entertainment, but you can put those fuel lines down into a small container of fuel. And if you were looking to start a car and you were kind of giving it some down the throat, if you will, the gullet, down the carburetor a little bit, like so many of us have over the years, you would then, if the car potentially starts over, you've got fuel lines running right into like a small tank. And that's awesome because if that tank, let's say there was junk in it or there's junk in the lines, you could potentially get the car started. I've seen people pull a car that's been sitting 30, 40 years and they get it running in no time. You probably have seen those videos on YouTube as well. Stuff sitting in junkyards for 40 years and they get it started. So, getting a vehicle started, oftentimes isn't that hard, if the points are good or potentially if it has electronic ignition and there's those few things. So I do really feel in closing that someone got a fantastic deal on this. The big deal breakers for some of you would be the color, which again, I love blue, and the fact that it's been sitting. So it's like, wow, if a transporter brings it, what do I do with it? I can't just start the car and go for a cruise, right? Like so many people want to do. They're going to have to put it into the facility and kind of go through it. The other unknown is we can't see in the deck lid. So we don't know, like underneath it, does it look good? From what we can see under the hood, it looked solid. I would assume at some point, probably the lines and things have been done. But as I've said, if the lines for the top and those, the rams and the cylinders and whatnot, the solenoids, if all of that hasn't been done, if you price that kit's $1,800 to $2,000 just for those items. So, there's potential there that you have to factor in when you're thinking about one of these cars, especially this one's been sitting, but I do believe at $55K, someone's gonna get this thing up and running and enjoying it hopefully pretty soon. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for the support. Check out the other videos, including the one that pops up here or here. Don't forget to subscribe. ODB, we out of here.